Picture this, a cursed treasure that turns brothers into murderers, a dragon so massive it takes decades to hoard its gold, and a young hero with a legendary sword walking straight into a trap that's been centuries in the making. This is the story of Sigurd and Fafnir, the ultimate tale of greed, betrayal, and dragon slaying that would make Game of Thrones look like a children's bedtime story. We're about to dive into a saga that has everything: gods making terrible decisions, family members literally stabbing each other in the back, and a shape-shifting dwarf who becomes a mountain-sized dragon. But here's the kicker. This isn't just about slaying a monster. It's about a curse so powerful that it destroys everyone who touches it, including our hero. Buckle up, because we're going from divine comedy of errors to the most epic dragon battle in Norse mythology. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for the shocking twist at the end, because not even the hero gets a happy ending in this one. Picture this: three gods walking through the wilderness, bored out of their minds. Odin, Loki, and Honor were traveling together when they stumbled upon a beautiful waterfall. There, basking on the rocks, was a large otter happily munching on a salmon. Loki, being Loki, couldn't resist showing off. He grabbed a stone and hurled it at the otter with perfect aim. One shot, one kill. The otter dropped dead instantly. Loki was pretty pleased with himself. Fresh otter meat for dinner and a nice pelt to boot. But here's where things went sideways fast. That wasn't just any otter. It was Otar, one of the shape-shifting sons of a powerful dwarf named Hreidmar. And Hreidmar was not the forgiving type. The three gods soon found themselves at Hreidmar's hall, proudly displaying their hunting trophy. You can imagine how well that went over. Hreidmar took one look at his dead son and flew into a rage. Before the gods knew what hit them, they were bound by dwarven magic and facing a death sentence. Hreidmar's remaining sons, Fafnir and Regin, stood beside their father with murder in their eyes. The gods had walked straight into the worst possible situation. They'd killed someone's kid and then bragged about it to his family. But Hreidmar was a practical dwarf. Instead of just killing three major gods, which would bring Asgard's wrath down on his head, he offered them a deal. They could buy their lives with gold. Not just any gold. They had to completely fill and cover Odor's pelt with precious metal. Every single hair had to be hidden. The gods agreed instantly. They sent Loki to gather the ransom, while Odin and Honor remained as hostages. Loki knew exactly where to go, to the underwater caves where Andvari the dwarf hoarded his legendary treasure. Now here's where the story gets really dark. Andvari didn't just hand over his treasure willingly. Loki had to threaten and cajole to get every piece of gold. But when it came to Andvari's most prized possession, a beautiful golden ring, the dwarf absolutely refused. Loki wasn't taking no for an answer. He snatched the ring right off Andvari's finger. That's when Andvari revealed his trump card. He placed a curse on the entire treasure, but especially on that ring. Everyone who possessed it would die violently, consumed by greed and betrayal. Loki just laughed it off. Dwarven curses were a dime a dozen, right? He hauled the treasure back to Hreidmar's hall, where they carefully covered every inch of Odor's pelt. Just when they thought they were done, Hreidmar spotted one whisker still showing. Loki had to place Andvari's ring right on that spot to complete the payment. The gods walked away free, probably thinking they'd gotten off easy. But the curse was already starting to work its magic. The moment that gold entered Hreidmar's hall, the family dynamics shifted completely. Fafnir and Regin stared at that massive pile of treasure with growing hunger. They'd helped their father demand this blood money, so shouldn't they get a share? But Hreidmar had other ideas. He claimed the entire hoard as compensation for his murdered son. The treasure was his and his alone. This didn't sit well with his remaining sons. Fafnir, the larger and more aggressive of the two, began to argue with his father daily. The gold seemed to whisper to him constantly, telling him he deserved it all. Regin, the clever craftsman, started making his own plans in the shadows. The curse worked fast. Within days, Fafnir's personality completely changed. He became paranoid, violent, and obsessed with the treasure. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything except that glittering hoard. and slowly a terrible plan began forming in his mind. One night, while Hreidmar slept, Fafnir crept into his father's chamber. Without hesitation, he drove a blade into the old dwarf's heart. Hreidmar died without even waking up, and Fafnir claimed the treasure as his inheritance. But even that wasn't enough for the curse. Fafnir's greed grew so intense that his very body began to change. His skin hardened into scales. His limbs stretched and twisted. His teeth became fangs. The curse transformed him into what he truly was inside, a monster. When the transformation was complete, Fafnir had become a massive dragon. He gathered up every piece of the cursed treasure and flew away to a desolate wasteland called Nidaheath. There he made his lair and settled in to guard his gold for eternity. Nobody could approach without facing his wrath. Now here's where our story gets a legendary upgrade. Meet Sigmund, one of the greatest warriors in Norse mythology. This guy was part of the famous Volsung lineage. Think of them as the ultimate warrior dynasty. Sigmund carried a sword so powerful that Odin himself had gifted it to his family line. But even the mightiest heroes faced their final battle. Sigmund's last fight was brutal and decisive. He faced overwhelming odds against enemy forces. The battle raged for hours until something devastating happened. His legendary sword, the blade that had never failed him, suddenly shattered into pieces. Without his weapon, Sigmund fell. But here's the thing about legendary warriors. They think ahead even in death. As Sigmund lay dying, he gathered the broken fragments of his sword. He handed them to his pregnant wife with a final prophecy. Their unborn son would forge these pieces into something even greater. The child would become the greatest hero the world had ever seen. Talk about setting high expectations for your kid. That child was Sigurd. After his father's death, young Sigurd needed a guardian and teacher. Enter Regin, the exiled dwarf brother of Fafnir. Regin was a master craftsman and smith. He took Sigurd under his wing, but his motives weren't entirely pure. Remember, this guy had been plotting revenge against his dragon brother for years. Under Regin's guidance, Sigurd grew into an exceptional warrior. The dwarf taught him everything: swordplay, tactics, smithing, and the ancient arts of war. But Regin's most important lesson was about the broken sword fragments. He told Sigurd that only a true hero could reforge them into their destined form. The young warrior practiced day and night, preparing for this ultimate test. The day finally came when Sigurd felt ready. He gathered his father's sword fragments and approached the forge. The heat was intense, the work demanding. But as Sigurd hammered and shaped the metal, something magical happened. The blade reformed stronger than ever before. He named it Gram, meaning wrath or fierce. This wasn't just any weapon. It was a blade capable of cutting through anvils and splitting shields like paper. Sigurd tested Gram's power immediately. He threw a ball of wool into a stream and let it float toward the sword's edge. The blade cut the wool in half without any pressure at all. Then he struck an anvil. Gram sliced clean through it like butter. This sword was ready for dragon slaying, though Sigurd didn't know it yet. With Gram at his side, Sigurd began making a name for himself. He embarked on various heroic quests, each one building his reputation. He fought monsters, rescued people, and displayed the kind of courage that bards sing about for centuries. But Regin was watching every victory, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal his true plan. The young hero was becoming exactly the weapon Regin needed for his ultimate revenge. Here's where Regin shows his true genius and his complete lack of moral boundaries. This dwarf had been planning his revenge for decades. He didn't just want Fafnir dead, he wanted the perfect weapon to do it. And Sigurd, with his legendary sword and growing reputation, was exactly what he'd been waiting for. Regin began his psychological manipulation carefully. He started telling Sigurd stories about the greatest treasures in the world. The dwarf described mountains of gold, magical rings, and artifacts of immense power. But one treasure stood above all others: the hoard of Fafnir the dragon. Regin painted vivid pictures of this wealth, making sure Sigurd's imagination ran wild with possibilities. But Regin was too smart to just appeal to greed. He knew Sigurd was a true hero, motivated by honor and glory. So the dwarf framed the quest differently. He told Sigurd that slaying Fafnir would be the ultimate heroic deed. No warrior in history had killed a dragon of this size and power. The bards would sing of this victory for 1,000 years. Talk about knowing your audience. The manipulation got deeper when Regin revealed his personal connection to the dragon. He told Sigurd the whole tragic story, how Loki's mistake had brought the cursed gold to their family, how greed had corrupted his brothers, and how Fafnir had murdered their father before transforming into a monster. Regin positioned himself as the wrong victim, seeking justice. He conveniently left out his own role in the family's destruction. Regin then shared his detailed intelligence about Fafnir's habits. The dragon had grown massive over the years, but he still followed predictable patterns. Every day, Fafnir traveled from his lair to a nearby water source to drink. He always took the same path through a narrow valley. This routine had never changed in decades. Dragons aren't known for varying their schedules. Here's where Regin's plan got brilliantly devious. He suggested that Sigurd dig a pit directly in Fafnir's path. The hero could hide in this trench and strike upward when the dragon passed overhead. This would target Fafnir's unprotected belly, the one vulnerable spot on his armored body. It was the perfect ambush strategy, and Regin knew it. But the dwarf added another layer to his scheme. He convinced Sigurd that this quest was about more than just treasure or glory. Regin claimed that Fafnir's evil was spreading across the land. The dragon's presence was corrupting the very earth around his lair. Only by killing Fafnir could they restore balance to the world. Classic manipulation. Make the victim think they're saving everyone. Regin's final psychological touch was pure genius. He told Sigurd that many warriors had attempted this quest before. All had failed because they lacked either the courage, the skill, or the right weapon. But Sigurd was different. He had Gram, the legendary blade. He had been trained by a master. Most importantly, he had the bloodline of the greatest heroes. This wasn't just a quest, it was his destiny. The young hero bought into every word. How could he not? Regin had crafted the perfect combination of honor, glory, justice, and destiny. Sigurd agreed to the plan immediately. He would dig the pit, hide in Fafnir's path, and strike the killing blow. What he didn't realize was that he was just another tool in Regin's decades-long revenge scheme. The dwarf was already planning what would happen after Fafnir's death, and it didn't include sharing the treasure. The morning of the hunt arrived with an ominous stillness. Sigurd and Regin traveled to the valley where Fafnir made his daily journey to water. The landscape was scarred and blackened from years of the dragon's presence. Plants withered, rocks were scorched, and the very air felt heavy with malevolent energy. This was a place where death lived and breathed. Regin pointed out the exact spot where Fafnir always passed. The dragon's massive body had worn a deep groove in the earth from years of traveling the same route. Sigurd began digging his hiding pit right in the center of this path. The work was backbreaking, but the young hero's determination never wavered. He dug deep enough to conceal his entire body, while still allowing room to thrust upward with Gram. As Sigurd worked, Regin offered some final advice and revealed his true cowardly nature. The dwarf suggested that maybe Sigurd should dig multiple pits, just to be safe. Then he mentioned that perhaps he should retreat to a safe distance to coordinate the attack from afar. Translation. Regin was getting as far away from the dragon as possible, while still being able to claim credit for the victory. Sigurd finished his pit just as the ground began to tremble. In the distance, a low rumbling sound grew steadily louder. Fafnir was coming. The young warrior climbed into his hiding spot and gripped Gram tightly. His heart pounded, but his resolve was unshakable. This was the moment that would define his entire legend. The trembling intensified as Fafnir approached. Then Sigurd saw him, and nearly lost his nerve. This wasn't just a large dragon. This was a mountain of scales and fury. Fafnir's body stretched longer than several houses placed end to end. His scales gleamed like black metal armor. Poisonous vapor poured from his nostrils with each breath. The dragon's eyes glowed with an intelligence that was both cunning and completely mad. Fafnir moved directly over Sigurd's pit, completely unaware of the danger below. The dragon's massive belly passed just overhead, exactly as Regin had predicted. This was the moment. Sigurd thrust upward with all his strength, driving Graham deep into Fafnir's unprotected underside. The legendary blade pierced through scale and flesh like it was cutting through silk. The dragon's reaction was immediate and terrifying. Fafnir reared up with a roar that shook the mountains. His massive tail thrashed wildly, gouging deep trenches in the earth. Black blood poured from the wound like a river. But instead of dying immediately, Fafnir did something unexpected. He began to speak. "Who dares strike me down?" Fafnir's voice was like grinding stone mixed with distant thunder. Despite his mortal wound, the dragon's intelligence remained sharp. He looked down at Sigurd with eyes full of ancient wisdom and terrible knowledge. "Do you know what you have done, young hero? Do you understand the curse you have just claimed?" Sigurd stood his ground, Graham still dripping with dragon blood. He identified himself proudly, expecting to hear the usual death threats or pleas for mercy. Instead, Fafnir began to laugh, a sound more terrifying than his roar. The dying dragon revealed the truth about the cursed treasure and what it would do to anyone who claimed it. "You think you have won glory," Fafnir gasped as his life ebbed away. "But the gold will consume you just as it consumed me. The curse will follow you until your dying day. Everyone you love will suffer for this treasure." With those prophetic words, the great dragon Fafnir breathed his last. The monster who had terrorized the land for decades was finally dead. But as Sigurd stood over his incredible victory, Fafnir's warning echoed in his mind. The young hero had achieved immortal glory by slaying the dragon. His name would be remembered forever. Yet something about the dragon's final words felt more like a promise than an empty threat. The curse that had destroyed Fafnir's family was now Sigurd's burden to bear. The real question was, would the hero's fate be any different from the dragon's? After slaying the dragon, Sigurd faced his first major decision as the new owner of cursed treasure. Regin emerged from his hiding spot, clearly relieved that his decades-long plan had actually worked. The dwarf was practically rubbing his hands together with glee. But he had one more request for his heroic protege, and it was about to backfire spectacularly. Regin asked Sigurd to cut out Fafnir's heart and roast it over a fire. The dwarf claimed this was an ancient ritual that would grant them wisdom and power. In reality, Regin wanted to eat the dragon's heart himself to gain Fafnir's knowledge and strength. Then he planned to kill Sigurd and claim the entire treasure. Talk about having your dragon heart and eating it too. Sigurd agreed and began preparing the heart over an open flame. As it cooked, the organ sizzled and popped like any piece of meat. But this wasn't ordinary cooking. Dragon hearts contain magical properties. While turning the heart, Sigurd accidentally touched it and instinctively licked his finger to cool the burn. That tiny taste changed everything. Suddenly, Sigurd could understand the language of birds. Two ravens perched nearby were having quite the conversation about him. "Look at this fool," one raven cawed. "He's about to be murdered by his own teacher." The other bird chimed in with helpful advice. If he were smart, he'd kill Regin first and keep all that treasure for himself. The birds revealed Regin's entire treacherous plan. The dwarf had been manipulating Sigurd from the beginning, using him as a weapon to kill Fafnir. Now that the dragon was dead, Regin intended to eliminate his student and claim the gold. The ravens even described how Regin was currently sharpening his blade behind Sigurd's back. Nature's gossip network was better than any surveillance system. Sigurd turned around to find Regin approaching with a drawn sword and murder in his eyes. The dwarf's friendly mask had completely dropped. "Thank you for your service," Regin snarled. "But I no longer need a student, just a dead witness." The old teacher raised his blade to strike down his unsuspecting pupil. But Sigurd was no longer unsuspecting. Thanks to his feathered informants, he was ready. As Regin lunged forward, Sigurd drew Graham in one fluid motion. The legendary sword met Regin's blade and shattered it instantly. Before the treacherous dwarf could react, Sigurd's next strike took Regin's head clean off. The manipulator had become the manipulated. With both dragon and dwarf dead, Sigurd claimed the massive treasure hoard. Mountains of gold coins, precious gems, and magical artifacts now belonged to him. The crown jewel was Anvari's ring, the original source of the curse. Sigurd slipped it onto his finger, sealing his fate just as Fafnir had done decades earlier. The ravens continued their commentary as Sigurd loaded treasure onto his horse. "Poor fool doesn't realize what he's done," one observed. "That ring will bring him nothing but misery and death." The other bird added grimly, "Just like it did to Fafnir, just like it did to Regin. The curse always wins in the end." But Sigurd was too caught up in his victory to listen to bird-brained warnings. He had slain a dragon, defeated a traitor, and claimed the greatest treasure in the world. He was the most famous hero alive. What could possibly go wrong? As he rode away with his cursed gold, the ravens shared one final observation. "He'll learn soon enough. They always do." The curse had claimed its next victim. Sigurd didn't know it yet, but his greatest trials were still ahead. The gold that made him rich would also make him a target. The ring that symbolized his victory would ultimately cause his downfall. Fafnir's dying prophecy was already beginning to come true. And there you have it, the complete story of Sigurd and Fafnir, where literally everyone dies except the ravens who saw it all coming. This tale shows us that some treasures are too dangerous to claim, some curses are too powerful to break, and sometimes the real monster isn't the dragon. It's the greed that creates dragons in the first place. Sigurd's victory over Fafnir was just the beginning of his troubles. That cursed ring would eventually lead to his own death, continuing the cycle of betrayal and murder that started with Loki's careless otter killing. The Volsung saga continues with even more tragic twists, political marriages, and family feuds that make this dragon battle look like a warm-up act. If you enjoyed this epic tale of Norse mythology, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Which part of the story shocked you the most? The family betrayals, the dragon transformation, or Regin's ultimate backstab? And don't forget to subscribe for more legendary stories where heroes don't always get happy endings.